I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. Why Zakat? We've started a discussion on ibadat, the acts of worship. I've already discussed why we say our prayers, why salat. Today I'm going to talk about why Zakat. Before I do that, I just want to point out two realities regarding Zakat. One is that we read in the Quran quite often that the Almighty mentions saying prayers regularly and paying zakat regularly as the two most prominent features of a Muslim. Every now and then you find that when the Almighty is talking about a Muslim, he is talking about the one who aqama as-salata wa atawu zakat. He says his prayers and he gives zakat. Why is this mention of the two made together? The answer is that the message of God Almighty requires us believers to take care of two important factors. One is God's rights. We are required to take care of the fact that we are satisfying the expectations of the Almighty that He has from us. And the other, that we also are taking care of the fellow human beings, their rights. Although it's true that all rights are the rights of God, whether they are of fellow human beings or God Himself. But the fact of the matter is that from a practical point of view, there are two different expectations that have been made on us. Salat, formal prayer, represents the rights of God. And zakat, when we pay it regularly, it is taking care of a very prominent requirement, expectation of rights of fellow human beings. So when the Quran says a believer is a person who says his prayers regularly and he pays his zakat regularly, what it means is that he is the one who is taking care of the rights of God as well as attending to the rights of fellow human beings, which is what God's message expects from us, that we should have a balanced approach towards both. The other question is, what exactly is zakat doing? That is, when we talk about salat, we've already seen that we say prayers to remember God. It's zikr. It seems that like saying prayers is for the purpose of remembering God, giving zakat is for the purpose of doing infaq, spending in the way of God. So God expects us to remember Him as much as is possible, and He expects us to spend in His way. In other words, to do infaq as much as is possible. The minimum expectation of remembering God is fulfilled by 5 times a day prayer requirement. And the minimum expectation of spending in the way of God is satisfied when we pay our zakat. So in other words, what salat is to zikr, zakat is to infaq. Now that raises another important question, which is, why infaq? Why is it that we have been asked to spend in the way of God? To answer this question, one would be well advised to look at a number of different Quranic verses, which, if we read them carefully, are pointing at certain realities of this life. I'll just summarize what the Quran says, because if I were to talk about each and every relevant verse, it would require a lot more time than is available. So, when we read the Quran, we find that the Almighty is telling us that the world that we are living in, whatever it comprises, everything belongs to God. Everything that is in the heavens, everything that is in the earth, all in reality belongs to God. Whatever we are getting temporarily is only meant for us to live our life properly, for us to be able to go through this test of life. When we earn, according to the Quran, we are not actually earning in the sense that this word would normally imply. We are, in actual fact, searching for God's fadl, bounty. That is, God has arranged for His bounties to be spread across. And when we make efforts to earn a living by farming, by starting a business, by putting up an industry, by applying for a job, rendering some service against which we earn fees, etc. All these efforts, according to the Quran, are in the category of searching God's bounties. So, when we are earning, as we understand this word in the worldly manner, we are actually doing nothing but searching God's bounties. What it means is that if God's bounty is available in a particular area of earning, we'll be able to get it. So two conditions need to be satisfied. I have to look for God's bounty, and that bounty should be available for me, and it's only then that I'll be able to get the earning, the means of living that would enable me and my family to be able to survive, to sustain ourselves. Now, what we also learn from the Quran is that, okay, we do have abilities, we do make efforts, which is, as I said, in the category of searching for God's bounties. God has chosen to give some people more than they need in economic resources, and some are given less than what they need. Had it been God's will, He could have given everybody whatever he or she needs for a living. There are no limits on what God can do. He doesn't have any limits on His resources. However, God has chosen to give some people more and others less. And this is meant to be a test of life. Those who get more are not necessarily the most talented people of all. They are not necessarily the ones who have worked the hardest compared to others. They do work hard. They do, many of them are bright people, but not necessarily all of them, and not necessarily these people are the brightest and the most hardworking. It's God's decision for the purpose of trying and testing humans. How? Those who have been given more are being tested as to whether they are thanking God enough and they are sharing some part of their wealth with those fellow human beings who are getting less. And those who are getting less are being tested in that they are expected to be patient, to not be greedy, to continue to have faith in God, and to strive to find means of living, to live decently with dignity despite their difficulties. Now, in God's scheme, there is a portion that He has kept for the poor, the deprived, in the wealth of those who are wealthy. They have earned, but they have not earned themselves. They have searched for God's bounties. God made available for some people more of His blessings and bounties than for others. And the idea is that He expects those who are wealthy to share some part of their wealth with those who are deprived and are poor. And they should realize that this is God's scheme, and therefore they ought to do it as a matter of obligation. It is therefore that the Almighty mentions most clearly that good people, God-conscious people, are the ones fi amwalihim haqqum ma'lum, in whose wealth there is a given definite portion, lis-sa'ili wal mahrum, for those who are deprived and for those who ask for help. So in other words, the wealth that the wealthy people possess, their wealth which belongs to the Almighty alone, who enabled them to be able to earn it. God, the one who provided them with that wealth, is expecting these wealthy people to share some part of their wealth with their poor fellow humans. And this is the trial which He has designed for both. In the eyes of God, neither the wealthy people are successful, nor the poor people are a failure. They are both going through a test of life, and success and failure would be decided on the Day of Judgment on the basis of the attitude, the moral performance which each of these categories were displaying. It is therefore that God condemns those wealthy people who spend their wealth extravagantly. They are spendthrifts. Instead of spending their wealth, the extra wealth that was there for others, on others who were deserving, they are spending it on themselves without any reason. It's unnecessary. And God also condemns those people who are saving their wealth for no reason. Okay, you are allowed to save for yourself, your family, and its future. But to save such huge amounts of wealth, which nobody would be needing in the near future, is something which is at the detriment of those poor people for whom the Almighty provided this wealth to the rich people. So both spendthrifts as well as those who hoard wealth are condemned in the Quran. Now this zakat, which is what we are discussing, is a word which means to purify. Zakat purifies our wealth. Zakat purifies our feelings, our obsessive attachment to this worldly life. Zakat purifies the negative feelings that exist between the haves and the have-nots. So when those who are rich, they spend on the poor, those feelings are removed and they take care of each other and have positive attitude towards one another. The law of zakat says that if you have a wealth which you are not using for any purposes, it's just there, dormant, then every year, and a day has to be decided for it, 2.5% of that wealth, its value, is to be deducted and considered as zakat, which could be spent either immediately or in the entire subsequent year. If we are earning, whether as farmers, cultivators, or industrialists, or as providers of services like doctors, teachers, lawyers, etc., 5% or 10% of what we earn is to be set aside as zakat. 5% in case if we have invested an amount in the area where we are working as well to make a living, to generate revenues. But 10% if we have either invested our funds in the earning project or we are working in it. And we also have zakat on livestock, which is by and large based on the principle of 2.5% deduction every year. But the law of zakat on livestock is mentioned in detail in the books of jurisprudence. Who are the people who should benefit from zakat? The Quran mentions a number of avenues, but essentially they can be broken down into two categories. The poor and the needy. The different categories of people who are poor, those who are poor in most part of their lives, those who are poor or dependent because of a certain situation that they find themselves in. They are traveling to a place where they are helpless, they are resourceless, or something has happened to their business all of a sudden that has caused them to become poor, etc. The same zakat funds were also required to be spent on emancipating the slaves. And obviously, some similar categories of people can also be helped through zakat. The other category of the possibilities of spending zakat are the category of helping out God's message to be spread across. God says, you spend fi sabilillah, in the way of God. The way of God is the way of God's message, the way of God's religion. So if there are any structures that are to be erected for the purpose of enabling people to worship God, if there are any activities undertaken for enabling fellow humans to come close to Islam, or the Muslims to learn more about God's message, zakat funds can be spent on this particular avenue as well. Zakat is a tax. It's a religious tax in that it has to be paid. You cannot escape from paying it. However, it's a religious obligation. So it's a form of an act of worship. Now, once a Muslim pays zakat, he need not pay anything to the rulers, because the expenditure of the rulers and what they do for the purpose of enabling the society that they are at the helm of the affairs of, zakat funds are meant for those very purposes. So if a person has paid zakat, he doesn't need to pay anything to the state or the rulers. However, we know that that possibility is not there, because the state authority, the rulers, are going to take out taxes from people, from their citizens, forcibly. So if that's the case, then on the one hand, a Muslim should calculate his zakat properly, carefully, and on the other hand, he or she should pay the taxes as well. If what he is expected to pay in the category of zakat is equal to or less than what he has already paid as tax, then the person doesn't need to pay anything more. However, if the expectation of zakat is more and the taxes that have been paid are less, then the residual amount has to be paid as zakat. Obviously, if a person is not paying any zakat, because he has already paid taxes which are more than what was expected from him in the category of zakat, he still can spend in the way of God voluntarily, but nothing is binding on him. Zakat can be paid to both Muslims and non-Muslims. It's an outlay which is meant for the people who are poor, who are needy, irrespective of their religious background or the background of their families, etc. So it's a spending which is meant for the poor, for the needy. And zakat has to be spent effectively on the poor. It has to be spent efficiently in the cause of God, fi sabilillah. And for that purpose, if there are institutions, organizations, then they need to be given zakat instead of individuals. However, one can give zakat funds to individuals as well, and can give zakat funds to organizations and institutions who have dedicated themselves for the cause of helping the poor to get out of their poverty, institutions and organizations that are dedicated for the cause of spreading the message of God effectively.